first I started recording. And just to sum up about the military operation of Russia, a general question: what's the military strategy of Russia's operation, and how successful has it been so far? What do you see?
Well, I think it's important when assessing this that we focus on what Russia called it, a special military operation, meaning that it deviates from a normal military operation. Normal military operations are conducted in accordance with doctrine. And the Russian doctrine is to combine the use of overwhelming firepower with massed might. So they will hit you with artillery, blow you away, and then punch right through you with massed armor. That is not what happened at the beginning of this operation. The Russians came in with a completely different approach, one that a Russian general called the Syrian approach. Now, I know in the West, they go, aha, that means they're going to blow up cities. No, if you actually study what Russia did in Syria, they worked together with the Syrian army to surround civilian areas where there were jihadists or opposition forces, and then give them the opportunity to leave peacefully. The Russian military police came in with buses, loaded them on, drove them away to minimize the damage that was done to civilian areas. So the Russians said, we're using the Syrian approach, which I think was predicated on bad intelligence. We see that with the Russians arresting 150 officers from the FSB's 5th Department, which was responsible for Ukraine. I think these officers told their leadership that the Russian military would be welcomed by the Russian-speaking civilian population, and that the Ukrainian military, at least parts of it, would stay in their barracks and not fight. That, of course, didn't happen. And we saw that the initial phases of the Russian operation were marked by Russian columns being ambushed and heavy casualties. The Russians adapted and continued to push. They still have a very light approach, or they had a very light approach, all through what we'll call phase one of their operation. Phase one, of course, is what I would call preparation of the battlefield. That is, the Russians have said, we want to liberate Donbass. In order to do that, we have to defeat 40 to 60 to 80,000 Ukrainian forces that are currently positioned in Donbass. But if we focus solely on them early on, that leaves us vulnerable to the rest of the Ukrainian military. And say what you will about the Ukrainians, they are fighting hard. They are well-trained, they are well-led, they are well-equipped. And I don't think anybody should denigrate their bravery or their professionalism. We'll put politics aside because I have no use for the Nazis of the Azov Battalion, and I wish them all the harm that can possibly befall them, given the fact that my country went to war against the Nazis 7 decades ago. And I am loath to see them resurrect their odious ideology in the heartland of Europe. But having said that, the Russian military now is engaged in a classic military operation, but still soft. They still want to minimize civilian casualties, minimize civilian infrastructure damaged. The first phase of the operation was designed to, as I said, prepare the battlefield by fixing the bulk of these forces in the Ukraine in place. That means that the militias coming out of Lugansk and Donbass reach out and grab them. And then you run a feint, a diversion attack down from Belarus towards Kiev. This involved around 40 to 50,000 Russian troops. You're not going to capture a city of 3.1 million with 40 or 50,000 troops. You won't find a single military professional will tell you, yeah, that's going to happen. But you did threaten Kiev, which means you fix the considerable Ukrainian forces that are in Kiev in place, and you force Kiev to divert reinforcements to the capital to defend it from this Russian threat. So that was the purpose of the diversion. And the Ukrainian military has said, yeah, that's exactly what they did. They came down, they ran a feint against Kiev, and they fixed us in place. We had to reinforce, and hats off to the Russians. They know how to fight a war. They also put Marines off of the coast of Odessa, fixing, again, the Ukrainian forces in Odessa in place. And then they launched a military operation complete with air power and missiles that's designed to degrade Ukraine's military capability to wage war. You hit their command and control, you hit their airfields, you hit their logistics, their petroleum storage, their ammunition storage, their vehicle repair shops, and you focus on the units themselves. And the Russians inflicted serious casualties. Serious casualties. I know the Ukrainians right now are talking 2,000 to 3,000. No, more like 20 to 30,000, and growing. The Ukrainians right now are on the verge of collapse. When the total death count comes out of Mariupol, you'll probably in Mariupol for that battle. But now comes the big fight. Having shaped the battlefield, frozen Ukrainian military, degraded the Ukrainian military, create a land bridge connecting Crimea with Russia. The Russians now have considerable operational latitude. They're redeploying their troops. And another thing about military operations, you won't find an army in the world that carries out over a month-long intense combat operation and then doesn't say, I'm out, pull back, fix the tanks, fix the vehicles, feed the men, rest the men, and then get them refocused on the new fight. So there was an operational pause as the Russians. Now, people in the West went, aha, that means the Russians lost. They got beat in Kiev. They didn't get beat in Kiev. Kiev did exactly what they wanted, and the Ukrainian military knows this and acknowledges this. Now the Ukrainians are very concerned because the Russians are amassing superior military force on the northern flank and the southern flank of that Ukrainian force in Donbass. And we're seeing the pincers come together right now. And I would guess within a week or two, the pincers are going to close. And that's all she wrote for 60,000 Ukrainian troops. It's over. They're dead, dying, or surrendering, up to them. And once that happens, Ukrainian military will break, just like the French military broke when Germany invaded France back in 1940. If you recall, the battles of May were intense. The French actually won a couple battles. They inflicted heavy casualties on the Germans, but the Germans ground forward, maneuvered, and eventually they surrounded the French main force. And when that happened, it was a straight shot to Paris. And I'm predicting. Go ahead.
May I? You're an expert on the Iraqi theater of the war, the wars for the last 20 years or something. And this confusion about failure or success of Russian operation is because the whole world is comparing what the United States did in Afghanistan, in Yugoslavia, or in Baghdad versus Russian did in Ukraine. When you compare them, really Russians didn't do. I mean, they didn't really bomb out Kiev or Odessa or any of those places. They have been working very hard on the field for the last 50 days. So can you make a comparison in order to clarify that success versus failure? I mean, this is totally two different kind of military operation, military strategy, I guess, right?
Well, let's start with Iraq 2003. You can't talk about Iraq 2003 unless you talk about Kuwait 1991. That is the Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm. Mm-hmm. In 1991, Iraq had the world's fourth largest army, very well trained, very well equipped, coming off of a victory against Iran in 8 years. Their Republican Guard had high morale, very capable force. The United States destroyed them, annihilated them. Their military was defeated decisively. And then the United States spent a decade with sanctions, meaning that the Iraqi military could not rebuild, could not re-equip. And so the military that faced the United States in Iraq in 2003 was a shadow of its former self, incapable of maneuver, incapable of combined arms operations. And at the end of the day, the United States rolled through them like a hot knife through butter. There was still some fighting. The Iraqis were brave. We have to give them credit. The Fedayeen fought hard. The Battle of Nasiriyah, I think, was tougher than the United States expected. And then there, of course, was the sandstorm and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, victory was inevitable. There was no way the Iraqis were going to defeat the United States. And the low number of casualties amongst the Americans proves this. After that, Iraq became a low-intensity conflict, a battle between the United States and various insurgency groups, whether it be a Shia insurgency, a Sunni insurgency, or a jihadist insurgency. That's a completely different kind of war. The same thing in Afghanistan. We were fighting the Taliban. Yes, they were organized. They had military formations, but not heavy units. We came in with primarily air power, and we annihilated them. I mean, the death toll is estimated to be over 75,000 Taliban lost their lives in 2001. And they continued to be defeated on the battlefield when they stood up to fight in the early years. But the United States went on to fight a low-intensity conflict in Afghanistan, which was focused on taking out high-value targets and not much more. And the Taliban won. And in Iraq, the insurgency won. I mean, the bottom line is the United States lost both of those wars by winning every battle, but losing the war. Russia, on the other hand, is fighting the second largest military in Europe after Russia. Let's not forget that. Mm-hmm. And it's a military that since 2015 has been training to NATO standards. It has the finest equipment in the world, some of the best leadership. It's organized as a NATO proxy. Up to 40 battalions actually can be pulled out and made interoperable. That means that in Turkey right now, in your corps, that you have NATO qualified troops. You can take a Turkish battalion, swap places with the Ukrainian battalion, and the Ukrainians will know how to operate with the Turks because they're trained like that. So it's a very, very modern military. So it's a completely different kind of war being fought in Ukraine, a war unlike anything the United States has seen since World War II. Now people say, well, what about the Gulf War? The Iraqis weren't that good. They weren't that good. They had older equipment. I mean, we could sit back with our tanks and knock them off before they even knew we were there. We had helicopters that could stand off with Hellfire missiles and wipe them out. No, we haven't fought an enemy that can hit back hard since World War II in terms of armored combat. The Russians right now are fighting a very large and very capable and very well-trained and very motivated enemy, and they're beating them decisively. It's not even close. The Russians will lose a couple tactical battles where their convoys get too far ahead, but when it's a force-on-force struggle, the Russians win every single time. Now, the Russians aren't going as fast as some people might like them to. They're going fast enough. They've captured an area larger than the United Kingdom right now, so they're doing okay. Their rate of advance is actually faster than the German blitzkrieg of France and Russia in 1940 and 1941. So, you know, people who are critical of the Russians don't understand the reality of large-scale combined arms warfare in a European theater. The Russians are doing it. The Russians are winning. It's a very bloody, very deadly fight for both sides. But at the end of the day, victory is inevitable. The Russians can't lose.
I mean, everybody is like an army general these days, all around the world. You know, sitting in coffee shops, or and then they say, "Oh,
sitting in Delmar, New York."
Yeah, exactly.
So the next question is about these neo-Nazi regiments. Because from the very beginning, the Russian military officers said that the fierce forces that we are fighting against was the neo-Nazis, Yeah. And we know that they are related to US officers on the field. So what's the role of these neo-Nazi regiments like Azov battalion, and what is their relation with the United States officers, military experts, etc.?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that prior to 2014, the right-wing ideology, political ideology in Ukraine was a distinct minority, primarily located in Lvov in Western Ukraine. It's a historical legacy of the Bandera movement of the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, heavily CIA financed, by the way. The Bandera movement was organized by the Germans initially. A lot of German equipment, logistics, the Gehlen organization, which was a German intelligence organization operating on the Eastern Front, was running it up until 1945. And then the United States took over the totality of the Gehlen organization, subordinated it to the CIA, and continued to run a 10-year resistance in Western Ukraine and Ukraine itself that killed over 300,000 people. And it also killed, like 36,000 Soviet security forces. So it's very bloody, but they lost. But that doesn't mean that the political aspect of it went away. In fact, it went underground, sustained by the CIA. From 1955 to 1990, the CIA funded the Ukrainian Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists or something of that nature, OANU-UN. I'm a Marine, so my alphabet might not be perfect. But the bottom line is this was a CIA-funded organization operating out of Munich, Germany, co-located with German intelligence because the Gehlen organization became the BND. And so it's a NATO-funded, NATO-organized political opposition movement to Soviet power. In 1990, the United States, the CIA stopped funding it. That doesn't mean it went away. It just means that Ukraine became an independent nation shortly thereafter. But these right-wing nationalists were a minority. But they became empowered and emboldened and militarized in 2014, when the Maidan demonstration became the Maidan Revolution. Again, backed by the United States, CIA reopened its lines of communication because the CIA never loses its line of communication. You can ask some people in Turkey about this. And the CIA brought them back to life, and they came in and they overthrew the duly elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, a pro-Russian president, Ukrainian. And you say pro-Russian, actually, Yanukovych wanted to join the EU. He wanted to join the EU, but he couldn't. The economy didn't work. And when he turned to the Russians and said, can I join the EU? Putin said, please, but we're not paying for it. We're not going to underwrite you. We're not going to free up your debt. If you want to break with us and join the EU, go right ahead. Don't ask me to underwrite the bill. And so Yanukovych realized he couldn't do it. So despite the expectations of the population, he had to side with Russia to join up with the Russians economically. And that led to a demonstration, a peaceful demonstration that started in late 2013. As it carried over into 2014, however, it was taken over, hijacked by these right-wing militants out of Lvov with the blessing and the support of the United States. They turned Maidan into a bloody revolution. You know, in the United States, we talk about insurrections. Oh, we had an insurrection on January 6th. No, we didn't. We had a demonstration that turned into a riot that did something very, very bad for the nation. I'm not defending what they did. It was close to sedition, if you want. But if it was an insurrection, every member of Congress would have been killed. End of story. That's what insurrections do. They breached Congress. They could have taken control of Congress, and they could have terminated Congress, and they didn't. Instead, they walked around and took selfies, and when they were asked to leave, they allowed themselves to be pushed out, and it was over by the afternoon. Again, an embarrassment for my country, a travesty, but not an insurrection. What happened in Maidan in 2014 was an insurrection. And now these militant neo-Nazis, because that's what they are, they are supporters of Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera allied himself with Nazi Germany. When the Germans came into Ukraine in 1941, Bandera joined their movement, and over 80,000 Ukrainian men joined the Waffen-SS from the start. Over several 100,000 joined over the course of years. And you say, well, so what? They joined the SS. Well, you might have heard of a place called Babi Yar in Kiev, where more than 30,000 Jews were shot.
Yes.
It was organized by the Germans, but the trigger pullers were Stepan Bandera's men. These are the most anti-Semitic, hate-filled people on the earth next to the Nazis who sponsored them. An odious ideology that thrives in blood and murder, rape, pillage. And they did it not just to the Jews, but later on, if you take a look at the 300,000 people that died during that 10-year revolt from 1944 to 1954, over 100,000 were Poles, because Western Ukraine used to be part of Poland. And Stepan Bandera's people believe in the racial purity of Ukrainian people. Where did you hear that before? Oh, maybe Nazi Germany, the Aryan race. So now they're talking about racial purity. So they purge the Poles, kill 100,000, drive others out. Then they turn on the Russians, who they call orcs, green-faced, and they turn on them and they kill them. These are horrible people. And now they've been militarized and they're in charge. Now, there's still a political minority, but a political, study Russian history. I'm not telling you to, I'm saying I know you have. I'm sure you're smarter than this. But you've heard the term Menshevik and Bolshevik, right? Menshevik means small, Bolshevik means big. But the reality was the Mensheviks were big and the Bolsheviks were small. But the Bolsheviks took over because they were brutal, because they brought violence to the table. When you didn't support the Bolsheviks, they killed you. And that's how they took control. That's what the Nazis are doing in Ukraine right now. They bully people. They call it Maidan. They told Poroshenko, if you don't support our policies, we will mini Maidan you. And they have. They ransacked his offices. They threatened Zelensky to be hung by the neck until dead. Not a secret threat. They made a videotape and broadcast it for everybody to see. Zelensky is subordinated to the Nazis, Ukrainian military subordinated. And one last thing. They had these militant battalions, they call them nationalist battalions, the Azov battalion, the Azov regiment, there's other names too. They were incorporated in the Ukrainian military in 2014. Now I'm here to tell you right now, in the United States, our military will say we're not a racist organization. But if we allowed the Ku Klux Klan to take their militia, form them into battalions, and then incorporate them into the United States military intact, then the United States military is a racist military, and the United States is a racist nation. There are people who say, Ukraine's not a Nazi country. You let Nazis into your military. You let Nazis into your military. You're a Nazi country. And then they let them everywhere. They run the police. They run the Secret Service. They run the government. Look at who's underneath Zelensky. Nazis, Nazis, Nazis everywhere. So the Russians have a point, and I'll finish just with this one thing, because in the West, we may go, okay, it's Nazis. Come on, man, it's not the others. Really? Ask the Russians. How many Soviets lost their lives fighting Nazi Germany? Between 23 and 32 million. That's the population of all of Turkey back then.
Yeah.
So basically, the entire nation of Turkey was murdered by Nazis in the Soviet Union. And you want them to forgive and forget? No. They will never forget. That's why in every city, every town, there's monuments celebrating the war, celebrating the defeats of this holiday in Russia, May 9th, Victory Day. When was the last time in the United States we celebrated Victory in Europe Day? Never, because we don't care. They care. Even though their veterans now are old and they can't march, the sons and daughters, the grandsons and granddaughters of the veterans take their photographs and they parade in what's called the Immortal Regiment. They will never forget, they will never forgive, and they will never tolerate this neo-Nazi cancer that's taken hold of a Central European nation. And that's a reality that the rest of the world just doesn't seem to get. When we talk about what's Russia up to in Ukraine, they're killing Nazis and the business is good.
You know, we showed Oliver Stone documentaries like Ukraine on Fire, Ukraine Reveal, things like 3 of them here, and they made really a lot of splashes. And whatever you're saying is actually they were repeating. So that means what you are explaining is very clear reality. But why in the world that this entire world is not buying it, or we're not able to convince them? Because in one of my writing, one of my articles, I wrote a little bit about this. And then my best friends in America back home, they are sort of leftists, supposedly. Man, they called me a Putin lover, dictator lover, and everything else. And then suddenly I said, hey, take it easy.
No,
So,
you hit it on the head.
Yeah,
it's
so
a classic.
I mean,
classic. Go ahead.
I mean, I am amazed that a lot of people cannot somehow comprehend all these things you're saying. And one of them said, for example, hey, Zelensky is a Jew. You know, how can you say that the Nazis are making a Jewish person as a president and taking order from him or something like that? So the logic is way up there somewhere. That's why the message.
You know, I can't comment on Turkey today. I lived in Turkey back in the 1970s, and I've studied Turkey. I've studied Turkish history, and I try and stay in touch. But I can't tell what the mood is today. But I do know that the Turks know the region they live in. that the Turks are familiar with Russia. The Turks are familiar with Greece. They're familiar with Syria, Iran, Iraq, and they know what's going on in each one of those countries. So I would say that the Turks have a more mature, nuanced approach to the world that they live in. Not here in the United States. In the United States, we are populated by the single most ignorant collection of people in the world about the world they live in. They don't know anything about the world they live in. They know next to nothing. So they're very vulnerable to what I call the bait and switch. Okay, because on its surface, Ukraine, if Russia hadn't invaded Ukraine and NATO hadn't tried to make it a member, Ukraine is a failed nation state. It doesn't even qualify as a nation state. It's cobbled together. Western Iraq cobbled, or Western Ukraine cobbled together with a Ukrainian center, with Eastern Russians cobbled in. It's a fake country because there's not a singular people. They call themselves Ukrainian. Even today now, people talk about how this is unified. Trust me, it hasn't unified. The Russian speakers are not in support of Zelensky or the Nazis, but the Ukrainians will spin it any way they want. The Americans have bought into this because we've replaced the Nazis. If you just let the Nazi ideology stand on its own, I think Americans would go, no, we can't support that. We can't support that. But now you oversimplify it. Hey, Zelensky's a Jew. How can Nazis support a Jew? It's a ridiculous argument. Really? Ask Zelensky the Jew what happened when he went to the Azov battalion in 2019 and asked that they be disarmed, and how the Azov battalion treated him. They don't view him as the president. He's a figurehead. As the guy, as the Azov commander said, yeah, I hear you, but didn't my people talk to you? Didn't they tell you what's really going on? So what do you mean what's really going on? I'm the president. That's what's really going on. Yeah, we hear that, but didn't our people, they don't view him as the president. He's a figurehead. That's it. They don't sit there and give him the respect he deserves as president. He's the guy who's supposed to say yes. When they say jump, he says how high. And that's exactly what's going on in Ukraine. But what we've done, instead of focused on the reality of Ukraine, we've allowed ourselves to be distracted by this thing called Putin. And I say thing because it's not a person. Because if you study Vladimir Putin, the person, you'll realize a couple things. One, he's not corrupt at all. I mean, there's an ambassador that ran the U.S. consulate in the 1990s who talks about meeting Putin during the very corrupt moments of Sobchak, who was the mayor back there in St. Petersburg. And he said, of all the people around Sobchak, there was only one who didn't take a bribe. That's Vladimir Putin. And that's backed up by various non-governmental organizations that went in there to try and get their foot in. They talk about how we had to bribe everybody. But when they met with Putin, there was no bribe. In fact, they better had their act together because he read their material and asked them questions. Vladimir Putin's the smartest man at the table. He's the least corrupt man at the table, which is why Boris Yeltsin picked him to be his successor. Because Yeltsin understood what a mess he had made of Russia. Again, Turkey knows this because you live next door to Russia. Russia in the 1990s was a disaster, an absolute disaster. And the Americans wanted it that way. We wanted it to be a disaster because now it's a defeated nation that we could exploit economically. Our relationship with Russia was 100% about economic exploitation, keep Russia weak. In order to do that, we had to have a guy named Yeltsin, who was not a Democrat. How can you be a Democrat when you take tanks in October 1993 and fire them into the parliament? How can you be a Democrat when you allow the United States to spend tens of millions of dollars to steal an election in 1996? It was stolen in such an open way that Time magazine bragged about it on the cover and said the best, I don't forget, it was something like the best Russian president American money can buy, which is the truth. Yeltsin wouldn't have won that election. We made the oligarchs. Today we were stealing their yachts, but we made the oligarchs because we needed the oligarch class to enable us to economically exploit Russia, to get majority shareholding in the thing that makes the Russian economy work, which is their energy. We went in and used these oligarchs so that we had majority stockholders in the most strategic element of Russia's economy. Putin came in and said, that's over, it's done. You know, he gave a speech early in his presidency and it's been taken out of context. You know the one I'm talking about. The greatest geopolitical disaster of the last century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And everybody stops right there and goes, see, Putin is just another Soviet. He wants to take over. Listen to the rest of the speech, because overnight, tens of millions of Russians became homeless. Yeah. They were people without a homeland. And as President Putin said, He will take care of those people. He will never abandon those people. If you miss that, you don't understand Putin. Putin brought the oligarchs in and said, I can't get rid of you because you're too important in the economy. But what I can do is tell you from now on, when you're dealing with the Russian government, you play it clean. No more stealing. It's over. You made your money. Enjoy it. But now you work with me, it's clean. And if you get involved in politics, I'll destroy you. You don't play politics. And several of them panicked and ran. They ran to London. Some thought he was bluffing. Everybody seems to think Putin bluffs. And they, the guy who ran the big oil company, Lukoil or something, he tried to get involved in politics. And Putin arrested him, threw him in jail. Putin don't bluff. That's the one thing that has to come from this whole thing. People go, I don't understand what's going on. What don't you understand? Putin has been telling the West since 2007 that NATO expansion is unacceptable. It's a red line. Mm-hmm. And yet now, and in 2009, February 2009, the U.S. Ambassador William Burns wrote a memorandum. Niet means niet, no means no, describing the red line that is Ukraine. And he said, if we continue to do this, and we try to get Ukraine to join, the result will be a Russian military operation, and Ukraine will lose Crimea and Donbass. Now, if we knew this in February 2009, why did we continue to push? Because we thought Putin was bluffing. Putin don't bluff. When he said, we're going to, if you ignore me, remember in December of last year, he provided draft treaties. He said, if you ignore me, we'll have to go military technical, which means war. And everybody went, he's bluffing. We're going to ignore him because he can't, because he's afraid of sanctions. Putin's not afraid of anything. I mean, he's not irrational, but my point is, this Vladimir Putin here wasn't a Boris Yeltsin, and the entire United States was threatened by it, so much so that the Obama administration initiated a program of regime change. People said, no, he didn't. What do you think the reset was? The reset was all about empowering Dmitry Medvedev, who had done that cute little constitutional swap in 2008. He's president now, and the reset was about empowering him so that Vladimir Putin could never return. In March of 2011, if it's not regime change policy, why did then Vice President Biden fly to Moscow, meet with the organized opposition to Putin, and publicly say Putin should not run for president again because it won't be good for Russia and it won't be good for him? Isn't that a threat? That's a threat in anybody else's language. He was saying that the United States will turn its back on Russia. All these good things that we're offering Medvedev won't be here anymore. Well, Putin became president, and ever since then, the United States, all the presidents, they have one thing in common. They've written PhD theses about how bad Putin is as a dictator, cartoon-like caricature. But now we've created this demon called Vladimir Putin, who is so far removed from the reality of the man that we can sit there and move the Nazis, who are truly evil, out of the way and say, no, Vladimir Putin, and the idiot American people buy into it. Because we have an idiot American media that goes to this, because we have idiot non-Russian experts who are advising the executive branch, which somehow has nostalgia for returning Russia back to the 1990s. Well, if you ever knew anything about the Russian people, they will never let that happen. They will never let that happen, and Putin for sure won't let that happen.
Well, since you brought the subject to Biden flying to Moscow and everything, do you think this Russian operation in Ukraine is coincidental with Biden presidency versus Trump presidency? When Trump was in power, this thing didn't happen that much. So I'm trying to bring the subject matter to the domestic politics of United States, because I just read today Biden's approval rate went down to 33%, regardless of all these, playing the hawks in Ukraine and everything else. So what do you think the American politics and Ukraine situation, how can they be related? Because in November, we have the elections too, which is very important elections, I mean, very historically. So if you can say something about that, that would be very clarifying.
Well, we knew that the Obama administration spent 8 years trying to get rid of Vladimir Putin and failed. We also know that NATO has been a controversial organization. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, 1990, some people say it began its collapse. NATO lost its reason for existing. It existed, it was a Cold War alliance, defensive alliance, and yet it continued. And it continued in a way that was disingenuous on two fronts. One, after telling the Soviets that not 1 inch eastward, then they decided, no, we're not going 1 inch, we're going hundreds of miles east, straight up to the Russian border. But Russia was weak, and so Russia couldn't oppose that. I mean, some of the most pathetic exchanges between national leaders took place between Clinton and Boris Yeltsin, and they're recorded. You can go to the National Security Archives and read the transcripts, and you see how the United States just doesn't care about Russia, how pathetic Yeltsin was begging that this not happen, but it happened. Then, Bush came in, Obama came in, regime change, NATO's expanding, getting its butt kicked in Afghanistan, not invading. It's no longer a defensive organization. It bombed offensively Serbia. It bombed Libya. Those are both regime change operations. So we're talking about an organization that has lost touch with what it is. It's sort of this lost organization. And Trump knew it. Trump called it out. He said, this is an anachronism. NATO, why is NATO here? What is its purpose? But even if you can tell me why it's here, why am I paying for it? Why is America writing this bill? And so Trump started to question NATO. And you saw the panic in Europe, and you saw the panic in the American establishment about what's going on, because the rules-based international order that gives NATO an inherent right to exist and do whatever it wants to do, regardless of the United Nations Charter, regardless of international law. NATO is a law unto itself. That's why it's a rules-based international order, not a law-based international order. And Trump's threatening it. I think the Russians were looking at going, this is interesting. Why don't we let this run out? Why don't we see what's going to happen here? Let's not create any artificial crises. Let's see what's going on. And the Russians weren't happy because, as Trump said, when put on pressure, he said, I have been the hardest against Russia than any other president. And it's not, even though he has his infamous phone call that he got impeached over, we still sold thousands of Javelin missiles to Ukraine under Donald Trump. It's not as though nothing happened. But the Russians were going to let this run out, let this see what would happen. And then Trump lost. Biden came in. And they know Biden because Biden was 8 years under Obama, and Biden ran Ukraine. He ran the Ukrainian portfolio. Yes. Biden is Ukraine. And at this point in time, the Russians went, no, we're not going to let this happen. That's why you saw early on the Biden administration, they mobilized troops, put 90,000 troops on the border. And Biden panicked, flew to Geneva in a panic to meet with Putin personally so he could stare him in the eye and tell him, if you go into Ukraine, it'll be the worst day of your life. We're going to sanction you like you've never been sanctioned before. And Putin went, thank you. Thank you for that information. Then he went back and talked to his national security people, and they spent from June 1991 until February 1992 crafting how to respond to the most massive sanctions in the world, which is why today Russia is barely a hiccup. I'm not going to say it's not hurting Russia. Even the Russians say it hurts. It hurts to be sanctioned on this level. Hurts. But the ruble didn't collapse because we had a plan. Stock market didn't collapse because we had a plan. Our people aren't hungry because we had a plan. And guess who didn't have a plan? All you people that bought into Biden's nonsense. Does Europe have an energy plan? No, they're trying to make one up right now, and they don't know how to do it. Did they have a plan to deal with the collapse in global confidence? No, their markets are collapsing. Energy prices are going up. German factories are shutting down. French factories are shutting down. I don't know what's happening in Turkey, but I can't imagine that it's wonderful for you. You already had some economic problems to begin with, and this only adds on to it. So, Putin had a plan. Biden didn't. I think Russia wasn't going to let Biden mature as a president because they knew what Biden was bringing to the table. All they had to do is listen. I mean, Biden sat there and called Putin a murderer. I'm talking about even before Ukraine. He said he's a murderer. He's a cold-hearted murderer. So the Russians, there's no surprise here. They know what Biden wants to do. He wants to bring Ukraine in. So why would Russia sit there and let the United States do something that Russia views as an existential threat? So Russia and Russia wasn't hiding this. When they remobilized in the fall, they said, yeah, we don't plan on invading yet. But if you continue to keep pushing them in, we'll have no choice. That's why they provided the 2 draft treaties, one to NATO, one to the United States. And they said, this is our position. Everybody went, that's it. It's very strange they gave us finished treaties because normally you come in high, but you negotiate away. There is no negotiation anymore. Russia said there is no negotiation. This is it. Take it or leave it. Accept this, or else we destroy Ukraine, which we're going to do if you don't accept it. And then it's not just about Ukraine. It's about a restructuring of the European security framework. Let me give you another nation out there that should be really, really worried right now for the stupidity that they're headed down. Finland. If Finland thinks it can join NATO without any repercussions, they don't know their own history. I'll remind the Finns of their history. In 1941, you made common cause with Nazi Germany, and you invaded the Soviet Union. You laid siege to the city of Leningrad. Over 1 million Soviet citizens died because of what you did. You threatened the Kola Peninsula. And you survived today only because in 1944, you jumped ship and you tried to get a peace treaty. Well, a peace treaty was signed in 1949. So a lot kinder than I would have been had I been the Soviet leader. Your pathetic little country would never exist. It had been wiped off the face of the earth, and we just call it the Finnish Autonomous Soviet Republic. That's the way it would be because you sided with the Nazis, but we let you live. We being the Soviets, not me. But one of the conditions was neutrality and perpetuity. You would never again join an alliance. You would never again allow Finnish soil to be used as a launching pad against Soviet and later Russian soil. That's why the Finns can peacefully coexist within a couple hours drive of St. Petersburg. Now they want to join NATO and they think Russia's going to let that happen. If you think Russia viewed Ukraine as an existential threat, wait till Finland tries to join NATO and threatens the #2 city in Russia with NATO soil being that close. It won't ever be allowed to happen. I can't predict the future. I don't speak for Russia, but I'm thinking right now that part of phase 2 of what's going on is the gloves are coming off and Russia's educating Europe as to what the consequences are if you stand up to us. And I tell you right now, if Finland doesn't back down, I predict a war between Russia and Finland this summer. It'll last about a month and a half, and it will result in Finland being wiped off the face of the earth. Not nuclear, but they will cease to exist as a modern nation state. And then Russia will go in and seize the territory necessary to create a security buffer between Finland and St. Petersburg, between Finland and the Kola Peninsula. And Finland will lose a lot of territory forever. Now, if that's what the Finns want, they can try to join. But remember, NATO membership is not instantaneous. It takes time. Now, the saving grace for this may be France. Because on April 24th, France holds an election and Marine Le Pen may win. I mean, it's not a guarantee that Emmanuel Macron gets reelected. And if Marine Le Pen wins, I don't think Finland will join NATO. I don't think anybody will be joining NATO anytime soon because I think France holds a veto over that because to join NATO, you need 30 members to say yes. And she already said, I'm not into this NATO thing. Not only that, I want to be friends with Putin. So I think if Le Pen wins, all this concept, all this fiction of European unity goes away, and it's even going to be more of a dreadful collapse for the United States and Europe when it comes to Russia. But it would also be the best thing could happen to European security. Because if Le Pen wins, NATO may have no choice but to sit down with the Russians and talk about a peaceful transition to a new European security framework. And Finland won't have to go through the horror of watching their nation destroyed because some Finnish politicians bought into the false promise of NATO security.
Yeah, please.
So I am wondering if you can bring the effects of this to the American elections and then the future for United States, because in November that's a very important, like as important as Le Pen's elections.
In a way, it's a midterm election that defines Congress. But let's put it this way: as much because again, I love my country. That's why I put on the uniform of the United States Marine Corps, and that's why I went to war for my country, and I'd do it again. Took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. I believe in the Constitution. even though the American people have lost faith with the Constitution. Because frankly speaking, if I held a pop quiz right now with 320 Americans and said, let's have a little quiz let's give you the quiz about the American Constitution that we give to people who want to be American citizens. I will tell you right now that I expect around 95% of the Americans to fail that test. So we don't know the Constitution, which means we don't know who we are, what we are. We just exist. What do we exist to do? Live comfortably. That's the American dream. That's the American lifestyle. A guy named James Carville was an advisor to Bill Clinton back in the when Bill Clinton first ran for the election. And Clinton was talking about New World Order, foreign policy, and he came in and he slapped him around a little bit. He said, no, no, there's only one thing you have to know. It's the economy, stupid. Focus on the economy. Tell the American people how bad of a job George Herbert Walker Bush is doing, and you'll become president. It's the economy, stupid. And not you. I'm just saying that's what he said. When we come to the November election, the United States may be in a recession. Now, it'll be a recession that's caused by Joe Biden's horrible economic policies, regardless, even if you didn't throw Ukraine into the mix. He came in. What part of you don't have a majority in Congress don't you understand, Mr. President? So when you come in and you try to enact sweeping economic reform, and you wonder why the Republicans just aren't running and signing up. He doesn't have the votes to push the agenda that he was trying to push. But now you throw Ukraine in, and he's destroyed the European economy. I don't know how Europe's going to get out of this. And that's going to have a boomerang effect here in the United States. We can only release so much fuel from the Strategic National Petroleum Reserve before reality kicks in and our gas prices go through the roof to join the rest of the world's gas prices. And when that happens, you already see it in food prices in restaurants. Restaurants are jacking their prices up 10, 12%. When you go shopping for food here, the prices are just climbing high. And you know what isn't going up? Paychecks. Paychecks are staying the same. So we have out of control inflation. We have stagnant pay policy, and we have a situation where it's not going to get better anytime soon because of the insane policies of one man, Joe Biden. And the American people are going to wake up to that fact. By the time November comes around, the reality of a Russian victory. And it's not just a Russian victory in Ukraine, it's a humiliation for NATO and the United States, who have poured billions of dollars of weapons into supporting this neo-Nazi regime. And by the time November comes around, Russia should be having a military tribunal having already been convened. They will be holding people to account. There will be trials. The Russians have already said, we've captured a lot of Americans. We've captured a lot of Europeans, and they're all going on trial. They're all going on trial. And it won't just be these Nazis on trial. It won't just be these mercenaries on trial. It'll be America on trial. It'll be NATO on trial. It'll be a humiliation for Europe, all of Europe, who has to sit there and watch a victorious Russia make a fool out of them. And the American people are going to see this. So not only is our economy going to stink, but we're looking at a failed president who humiliated the country. And I think the Republicans are looking at a sweep of both the House and the Senate, which means the next 2 years, Biden can do nothing. He's a lame duck president who will get no meaningful agenda push. Meanwhile, he's not the world leader he thinks he is. And if you think Europe is a disaster right now, wait till China wakes up and says, hey, Taiwan's looking pretty good right now. See, because China's held off on Taiwan because they're scared. What would happen if we invaded Taiwan? Well, now they know what would happen. The world's going to sanction you. But the world sanctions don't work. And not only that, China and Russia have come together to form this wonderful Trans-Eurasian Economic Union together with 2/3 of the world's population. I think China, and you see the tough talk coming out of China right now. They're saying, yeah, we're going to take Taiwan. And we know it means war with the United States, but we're not afraid. We're not afraid of America anymore because America's got nothing. You got nothing, America. And embarrassingly, they're right. We got nothing. We've got nukes, but we're not going to go to global thermonuclear warfare over Taiwan. No, we're going to sit there and watch China take Taiwan, and we can't do anything about it. And that'll be another humiliation. And the person they're going to blame is Joe Biden, the man who led America to the most embarrassing geopolitical defeats in the history of the United States. So yeah, I think that we're in a lot of trouble come November. And then, what scares me is that this is breathing life back into a guy named Donald J. Trump, who should never have been president to begin with. The man's not qualified to be president. He has some ideas I like on NATO. I like that, but the rest of the stuff, no, he's not presidential material. And yet we're going to make him president again. And I'm afraid what that's going to mean for my country and the world. I'm very nervous about it. That doesn't mean I like Biden. I think it's disgusting that my country, 320 million of us, those are the two choices we get. Joe Biden, Trump. I mean, come on now. There's got to be somebody else out there that's better qualified. I could get my dog catcher, and he'd be better qualified than either one of those people. He's got some common sense. He knows that when you have a rabid dog, you don't walk up and let the dog bite you. That's common sense. I could use that in the White House right now. But instead, we have Joe and we got Donald, and that sort of tells you how unhealthy America is right now politically. And fortunately for the world, you got a guy named Vladimir Putin in Moscow, and he's not insane. He's not power hungry. He knows his limits. And I think that Putin is going to work with Europe to come out of this problem in a way that respects Europe. I don't think Putin's out to humiliate Europe. Europe humiliated itself with these sanctions. That's a European problem, not a Russian problem. Russia doesn't want to control Europe. Russia doesn't even want to destroy NATO. Russia just wants NATO to go back to its 1997 borders in terms of the troops. It doesn't mean that Poland leaves NATO, the Baltic leave NATO. It means, though, that there can't be any German troops in Estonia. There can't be any French troops in Lithuania. There can't be any American troops in Poland. They all pull back to the pre-1997 borders, and Russia will be just happy, because then Russia now has a cordon sanitaire, a nice little demilitarized buffer zone, and it doesn't have to worry about things like spending billions of dollars on building up a large conventional military. It can go back to using its precious resources to make life better for the average Russian citizen, which is what Russia wants all along. And if America would just keep its nose out of Russia and let Russia be Russia, let China be China, let Turkey be Turkey. I mean, who are we to tell people how to live? That's what gets me, when we should be focusing on telling ourselves how to live, because we got a lot of problems here in America. Trust me, I live here. We got a lot of problems. And the two biggest problems are named Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And because what that says about this country, it says volumes. Just think about it. If the two top politicians in this country are named Joe Biden and Donald Trump, what's that tell you about the whole country and the political health of the whole country? It's not a great vote of confidence.
Bill, do you have anything, Ishikun?
We are running out of time. Do you have 10 more minutes, or you just have to go? 10 more minutes.
Well, is this being recorded?
Yeah.
I can come back to you, but I have a hard 1 o'clock obligation that I promised. It would be like if I promised to be on a one with you and I ignored you, you'd be sort of upset with me.
Yeah. No.
But I can come back to you.
Actually, this is pretty good so far.
Yeah.
We tied it up. I think we are okay, Scott.
Okay, we are okay. Okay.
Very nice.
You don't need to come back. Yeah,
If you decide you need more, contact me and we can schedule something. If not,
okay.
I think you just edit this down and make it useful for you.
Okay, you touched upon almost all the points we were going to ask. So thank you. It was excellent.
You were very, very good to, putting even China, you put it in there. I was about to ask. Now, it's a global analysis and suggestion. It's very nice.
Thank you so much.
We're going to really enjoy it.
All right, guys. Çok teşekkür ederim. Tanıştığıma memnun oldum. I think that's right.
Yes. Tanıştığıma memnun oldum.
Yes. True. Biz de memnun olduk.
Biz de memnun olduk. Thank you so much.
Güle güle.
Pleasure and honor.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.